Well, if this works, we're going to have to get at least two. I'm a flexible kind of guy, but I'm not going to share. Well, I knew it was sneaking up, and I knew when it got here I would probably refer to the Olympics in a sermon, but I didn't quite realize until a day or two ago that last night it started, and quite a spectacle and quite an inspiration. The best of the best gathered from around the world. I guess I wasn't emotionally committed to this particular Olympics. The last couple of Summer Olympics, of course, all of us were watching Ruben reasonably closely and hoping the best for him and for Canada. And, of course, him being a kid who grew up in our Regina congregation and married to a beautiful girl from our Westlock congregation, you sort of, we have some commitments. If it was Winter Olympics, I'd be very committed, since I know all the names of the hockey players, but and feel related to them and sort of vested in their success. But over the years, as we've read in 1 Corinthians and in other places where Paul makes obvious reference to the Isthmian Games, if it was Corinth, or his general understanding of the Greek culture, which really celebrated the games and really used it to bring the city-states together, and at times to cement political alliances. And, there was a great deal of influence that was exerted around the culture of the games. And he grew on the games, and he used analogies from what we call the Olympics now, but from the games that were known at that time. And also from the idea of the marathon race, which was the most famous to us now of the foot races. Wasn't necessarily part of the games at that time, but it had come into the culture. Everybody knew the story of marathon. And he drew upon those analogies to explain certain aspects of the Christian life. And so it's worth taking a look at that today and considering what Paul had to say to us in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. 1 Corinthians 9, beginning in verse 24, he says, "Know you not that they which run in a race run all, but one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain. And every man that strives for the mastery is temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a corruptible crown, but we an incorruptible. I therefore so run, not as uncertainly, so fight I not as one that beats the air, but I keep under my body, and bring it into subjection, lest that by any means, when I have preached to others, I myself should be a castaway." Now, as you read something like that, it's a sober lesson he's bringing out here. Is he big on health? Is he sort of talking about the fact that we should be very, very careful about our physical bodies? Well, he certainly doesn't counsel us to neglect them, but if you were to take a look at Colossians chapter 2 and verse 20, here he speaks against the Greek preoccupation with the body beautiful, against the idea of course, they celebrated the games without clothing. Where they got that idea from, I have no idea. But, you think between the sun and the sand and everything else that you want some clothing on, but they celebrated the games, which, of course, were quite disgusting to Jews to see the naked body in that way. But there were also numerous aspects of Greek culture that celebrated asceticism, certain disciplines, and so forth. And so Colossians chapter 2, Paul addresses a wide spectrum of things, and he says, look, you died with Christ to the basic principles of the world. Why, as though you still belong to it, do you submit to its rules? Don't handle, don't taste, don't touch. These are all destined to perish with use because they're based on human commands and teachings. Such regulations indeed have an appearance of wisdom, with their self-imposed worship, their false humility, and their harsh treatment of the body. They lack any value in restraining sensual indulgence. So he points out that the ideas that were presented in Greek culture, they lack value, and the real need was to restrain sensual indulgence, to discipline the mind, and to discipline the senses. So we might say, is he for good health? Yes. Is he for developing the entire man? Yes. But the types of rules and regulations and the weird ideas that come along, the weird diets and so forth, no. There is a spiritual aspect to man where the real discipline needs to come into play, he's saying. So you balance out what he has to say, and you come to an understanding that, the analogy he draws on in Corinthians does speak to us. And if we use it wisely, we can grow in our knowledge of what God is asking of us. So if we go back to 1 Corinthians 9 and verse 24, we begin with this premise. Know you not that they which run in a race run all, but one receives the prize? Okay, that's the premise. Typically, there is a winner who gets a gold medal, and then there are losers. And sadly, we will often say in the commentaries, nobody remembers the silver medal. Nobody remembers the bronze, even though it may represent a huge achievement for that individual and a great honor. And he says, this is one of the areas that you're familiar with your background, with the games that you see in Corinth and in other major centers, and of course at Olympus in Athens. But he then goes on to say, so run that you may obtain. And he's not saying here that there are winners and losers in the body of Christ. He is saying that if you run, you will obtain. He is emphasizing that. I remember once when I was a youngster sitting in a Bible study on a Friday night and hearing somebody pontificate about the need for strong effort in the Christian faith. And he made the astounding statement. He said, there are many people who will lose in the end. If we are to believe the Gospels, he said, there are 5 wise and 5 foolish virgins. Half the church will not make it. And that stuck in my mind as probably the most stupid statement I have ever heard. Half the church will not make it. And why is, you're telling me God predestines 50% of those people he calls to fail? And he's got it right down to that, 50. And by the way, that man was a very intelligent individual, quite a good teacher, went on to have a very well-known radio ministry across the United States. And ironically, his radio ministry in later life was titled Born to Win, which was not actually being reflected in the teaching that he gave on that particular night. So run that you may obtain. The idea, obtain first prize, and then all my brothers and sisters can sort of line up behind me. No, run knowing that you will obtain. And he takes one aspect of the games and then points out that they run against odds. You run against or with a guarantee. Now, there's one aspect of the marathon, and as you can probably tell, I've trained for and run quite a few in my day. Did I say that out loud? No, I shouldn't fib. No, I have been instructed by watching people come across the finish line at marathons. And I've been instructed from a couch with a cold beverage as I watch TV. So let's not make any false pretense that I have firsthand knowledge of a marathon. But they will, upon being interviewed, declare that they have won their race. I won this marathon in 3 hours and 57 minutes. Somebody else might declare, I won it in 5 hours. Others might take 6 or 7 hours to win it. But the point is, to participate is to win. To finish is to win. This is not the way that you understand the typical foot race of the games back then. You might have one or two types of foot races. Some were run with armor on, some without. Maybe the throwing of a javelin, the throwing of a discus, the running of a chariot race. There weren't too many other events that were featured. But to run the distance race that we call the marathon, just to participate made you a winner. And so Paul is saying to us here, look, they run and one person's lucky to come across the line and be so honored. You run knowing that once you finish, you have prevailed. You've overcome. You've conquered. You are a winner. In 2 Timothy chapter 2, he pulls again on this. He says, look, if anyone competes as an athlete, he does not receive the victor's crown unless he competes according to the rules. And this was a very big part of participation in the games. We wouldn't think of it this way, but the rules were everything. Now, of course, in this day and age, we have a lot of rules about doping, and apparently they don't mean much. So we find new things to dope with from year to year. Back then, the rules were fairly straightforward. Are you Greek? Are you a Greek citizen? Even Alexander had to prove that he was Greek before he could participate, because he was from Macedonia, and so there were a few picky souls who decided to, test him. And the participation began with actually 10 or 11 months of training together. They considered training for the games as part of participation. And they considered themselves competing not for personal honor so much as for the honor of the one who sat upon the high seat. I was privileged to spend a couple of days around Corinth many years ago, and you can still see the bema seat where the judge sat. Judgment was given, and it is upon the bema seat of judgment that the master of the games, it might be the emperor, might be the governor of that area, it could be anyone who represented the people of Greece. And in later times, it might be somebody who represented, let's say, even the Senate at Rome as the popularity spread. But the one who sat on the bema seat was the one who was honored by the games. When you participated to honor the judge, not yourself. And you understood that. And so to train together promoted the idea of where we are part of something greater than ourselves. I know many years ago when we used to have our churches bring track teams together, and we had a lot of fun with that. The idea being that our kids couldn't participate at that time in activities that were on a Saturday, and so we tried to give them a break, and we had track and field meets, and we'd get them all together for a long, hot, sweaty Sunday. And kids used to have a lot of fun with that. And then after provincial meets, we'd have a national meet as well. And the first time I saw somebody just come to participate in their race and then leave, I knew times were changing. Because all the kids understood that the first place gets 10 points. Silver gets 8, bronze gets 6. But then the 4th, the 5th, the 6th place finisher also got a few points that added to the team total. And eventually, if your team total was good, then you were all honored because you'd participated in that particular track meet. And we tried to make it that. True, there was the personal best to consider, but your personal best was yours. You could take some satisfaction in, quote, bettering yourself from last year. But you also took satisfaction in contributing to your team. The honor was not just for the one who came in first. Participation resulted in something. And so I remember there was a couple of brothers who moved in from Ontario, and I was in Red Deer at the time. We brought our track team up, and they just drove up for 30 minutes of participation because that's the way cool athletes did it. You know, just come, you run your race, you leave. You don't have to stick around and be sociable. Well, to the Greeks, you stuck around and you were sociable for 10 or 11 months before the game. And you lived by code of honor. In fact, if you fudged on the code of honor, your relatives were responsible for you. And so you knew that you need the sponsorship of your family to participate. And if you pulled on any dirty tricks, if you cheated, if you were caught, I don't know, what could you be caught doing? Well, you make something up. I don't know what cheating was 3,000 years ago or 2,500 years ago. I know what it is today. It's blood doping, and it's all sorts of drugs that don't test out until eventually they get a test for them. I know what my rules are as I compete in this marathon of the Christian life. And those rules are to stay, quote, within Christ. Okay? Within Christ. A lot of folks are fond of saying that the grace of God is just wide open. The grace of God is the grace of God, and it keeps me within Christ, not outside of Christ. So back in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, it says, every man that strives for the mastery is temperate in all things. So there's a certain amount of discipline. God has given us many gifts to enjoy, but temperance and discipline in all things apparently is an aspect of the godly life. I am not supposed to be enslaved to the gifts that God has given me. I'm not supposed to abuse them. You probably know this off by heart, as Paul explains in Romans chapter 12. He says simply this, I urge you, brothers and sisters, I urge you in view of God's mercy to offer your bodies as living sacrifices. And now he's drawing on the analogy of the Old Testament. You know, you used to be able to go, offer a sacrifice, and that would take care of everything for now. But here he's saying, look, what God is really after is the living sacrifice of your life, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. So don't get twisted any longer to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test, you'll be able to experience and approve what God's will is, his good, his pleasing, and perfect will. Again, are there rules to the Christian life? The answer is yes. And the rule is stay within Christ. Stay within Christ. If you think, well, you can use your imagination. There are so many things you cannot imagine Jesus doing. Don't do them. Simple as that. And so he continues now in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Now they do it. They have their code of honor. They have their code of conduct. They have all their discipline and rules to obtain a corruptible crown, but we an incorruptible. Now, if you participated in the games, then maybe you got a laurel wreath. Maybe you got an ivy wreath. Maybe it was pine. I think that was germane to the Corinthian experience. For us, we sometimes are confused about the matter of the crown that God gives us. The crown that is mentioned time and again in the book of Revelation is not a crown of rulership. It is called also the crown of life. And it reflects this honor of participation, this honor of coming across the line, having competed for the glory of the games, for the glory of the one who sits on the judgment seat. And it is a crown of righteousness, a crown of life. It is not it's not the same type of crown that Jesus has been crowned with. He is the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. We receive a crown of righteousness, a crown of life. And that reflects the teaching that Paul takes out of the experience of the games. You participate, you are so honored. So there's a little difference between our crown and his crown. Paul says at the end of his life, I have run the race. I've finished the course. And when I finish, he says, there is this crown of life laid up for me. And that he pulls again directly on the analogy of the games. And so as we participate in this life, which is very much a marathon, we anticipate crossing a finish line that will lead us to a victory over all the things that would cause us not to finish the race and would militate against us receiving a crown. So back in 1 Corinthians 9, he says, I therefore so run, not uncertainly, not wondering which direction to go, zigzag, whatever. I know that there's a course. I fight, not as one who beats the air. So he is, again, picking up on this boxing and wrestling, which was part of the games. Not as one that beats the air, but I keep my body and bring it into subjection, lest by any means, when I have preached to others, I myself should be a castaway. Now, this is not something he places here as some sort of dire warning in the sense that that particular teacher did when I was a youngster. A lot of you are going to fail. 1, 2, failure. 1, 2, failure. 1, 2, failure. Oh, failure, failure. 1, 2. This sort of thing. What he is saying is, look, I do these things, and I'm aware of my own frailty, and I want to make sure that I am not in some way or other distracted from finishing the race. He doesn't say, it's just such a dodgy thing, this. God is so arbitrary. He's so, you got to be real careful with him. So absolutely, sweat 24/7 and make sure you just put out all your effort all the time because, well, you never know when the hammer's going to fall. This is not what he is saying. But he is simply saying, I do these things because that's what it takes to participate. And, okay, I can be misguided. I can be distracted. Now, he reflects that in Ephesians chapter 6. And he says this, he says, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual weakness in high places. In other words, we have some opposition to us being successful. There is another spiritual force at work that says simply, I'd like to see you fail. I'd like to see you cease to participate in the race. There is an active opposition that resists and at times can cause you to, as they say in the marathon, hit the wall. You can run up against things that will tell you, no, it's not worth the effort. And it can become a mental battle. When I was a teenager in school in England, we used to have intramural sports. And in a big boys' school, which I attended, they would split us up into what were called houses. And they were named after perhaps dukes or counties or something like that. And I was maybe a member of Stafford County. And this was our house. And we would have house meetings, and we would have a field day or a sports day, and they would tell us what you need to do is participate, and our house will accumulate so many points, and we'll come out on top if we all put our effort in. And invariably, they would come down to certain events that were not as popular. And there were a couple of times I was, we need a few more names for the cross country. Now, come on, you boys who haven't done your bit for the house. Let me put your name down for the cross country run. You, idiot boy. Me? Yes, you. What are you participating? Well, I'm doing the shot put because I'm kind of built for the shot put. And I'm doing the discus because I'm kind of built for the discus. Well, we need people in the cross country run. I'm going to put your name down. You get bullied into doing something like that until you learn to speak up and say, no, thank you, sir. I don't want to die. But anyway, I got hornswoggled into doing the cross-country run a couple of times. And all I remember was halfway through, scrambling down the bank and trying to cross the stream and doing all those things. I was in great agony, great pain. And I finished that race all right, but I finished it in a stroll. There was nothing left. And quite a few of us did that. We didn't gain any points for the house, but at least we didn't quit. I learned to say no after a few years to getting bullied into doing something like that. Tough times like that taught me that this long run that they call cross country, isn't built for me, and I'm not built for it. And I don't want any part of it. However, life, which is a long run, well, I don't have any choice in that. I've started, I'm well along the way, and I can't afford to be psyched out. I can't afford to be set back. I have to remember when difficulties come that this too will pass if I just keep putting one foot in front of the other. Thankfully, in this race of life, there's no clock. Nothing says I have to participate, get all done within a particular time. I have confidence in the judge of these things that if it takes me longer, then he'll give me longer. Which is why I anticipate a fairly long life. But anyway, because perfection is not coming in a hurry here. But in Hebrews, he picks this up again and he says, there are a lot of people who have gone through this before you. Therefore, seeing that there are so many people who have gone before you and have been successful, he said, you are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses. Lay aside every weight and sin which so easily besets us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. And looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him that endured such contradictions of sinners against himself, lest you be wearied and faint in your minds. This is where the spiritual warfare takes place. This is where we wrestle not against flesh and blood. We become just weary of the race. It tires us. It drags us down sometimes. I remember a very wise person many years ago said, bodies don't get tired. Minds get tired. You know which wise person said that? Glenn Sather. He was commenting on hockey players. And he said simply, commenting on a number who I guess weren't performing up to snuff, he said, bodies don't get tired, minds get tired. And I'm sure for some of you old guys, you remember a time in the 70s and 80s when there was a nifty guy who dominated the hockey scene. Anybody remember Guy Lafleur, the Flower? He was, or as I believe they call him in Quebec, Le Demon Blonde, the blonde demon. And I remember I began to be interested in the early 80s in hockey because things were happening in Edmonton, and it was such an exciting time. And I said to myself, one day I'm going to see Guy Lafleur play. And you know what that stinker did? He retired in 1985. He retired. You know why he retired? he had a season where he started, and in the first 20 games, I think he scored 1.5 goals. I mean, it was that bad. I call it 0.5 because the second one barely went in. It just sat on the line and they gave it to him because they had to. But he parted with some acrimony from the Montreal Canadiens. And it was said at the time, well, this is a tough time for Guy. He's in a slump, and he's never been in a slump before in his life. And his coach sort of had him playing on the fourth line for a while, which was kind of offensive. He had a great deal of pride and emotion. And so he quit. And he started playing old-timers hockey. And he played old-timers hockey for 1, 2, 3 years. And every time he played, people would say, you know, he still has got the gifts. And so after 3 years, after being in the Hall of Fame, he came out of retirement, which was really nice of him because I wanted to see him play. And he went through the preseason, and he played in Edmonton, and whether or not it was partly political or partly whatever, but Mark Messier praised him. Remember that. And Esposito, who was the general manager in New York at the time, signed him to a one-year contract. And that particular year doesn't speak much for the depth, I suppose, they had on the Rangers that year. But suddenly, again, he was the number one right winger on the team. I remember it well because a friend of mine by the name of David Stirk, who was at the time the secretary-treasurer for a denomination in the UK, and he'd been one of my classmates. He came to Canada, and he spoke in Red Deer, and he spoke in Edmonton. And I said, Dave, you got like 3 days in Canada. What would you like to do? And he said, well, I don't know. I said, well, if you're going to experience Canadian culture, you've got to go to a hockey game. So Phil Hopwood and I took him to Northlands Coliseum on a Saturday night, and the Rangers were in town. Thank you, Lord. And I got to see Guy Lafleur play. And that night, the score was, the Oilers won, but the score was 10-6. I mean, now that's kind of like a basketball game, isn't it? And Stirk was up and down in his seat. He said, I can't believe what I've been missing in life. This is incredible. And, goal 13, goal 14, goal 15, goal 16. And he assumed every hockey game is like that. And to this day, he thinks that's the way hockey should be played. I saw him last year in England, and he has fond memories of that one great experience of coming to Canada, coming to Edmonton. That night, Lafleur was, I think, the second star of the game. He had 4 points. The Rangers lost, but of the 6 goals they scored, he set up 4 of them. And somebody who was washed up 4 years ago is now playing again like a young person. What changed? Well, he gave up smoking for 3 weeks. I don't think it helped much. He started working out in the gym for a month, got tired of that. The only thing that really changed was he was refreshed in his mind. He went to a different location, and he got a new perspective. And the next year, he went to Quebec Nordique, and he played 2 more years. What changed? Nothing except his perspective, his mind. He was no longer weary. In fact, the night before he played his last game in Quebec City, he played again in the Forum. And you know what he did? The next to last game he ever played in the NHL, he scored a hat trick, And that was the sort of guy he was. Of course, now he was very emotional. He played on his emotions, and that's why he excited people. But I never forgot his particular journey through the 80s, because there was a time when he was weary, and he fainted in his mind. And part of that was the coach, part of that was his own performance, part of that was I've gone 20 games. And I don't have 30 goals yet. What's wrong with me? I'm used to being the dominant player on the ice. I can't do it anymore. It's time to quit. And 3 years later, I quit too early. And he went back, and he was considered a very productive. In fact, he went to the Nordique because, of course, he wanted to play in Quebec. But the LA Kings said, you may be in your late 30s, but, you're still worth $1 million to us. Why don't you come and play in Los Angeles? He said, no, I'd rather be, French in Quebec than French lost in LA, this sort of thing. Consider him that endured contradiction against himself, lest you be wearied and faint in your mind. That's where the fainting takes place. And what is the counsel that you're given? Well, I wish there were all sorts of, here's some shortcuts. No. Let us run with patience the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, who started you on the race and who will ensure that you finish on the race if you're trusting in him. In fact, if you consider his experience, for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross and now is sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Wow. Many years ago, I came across a psalm. It was an Australian psalm, so it wasn't quite as perhaps well written as the Hebrew Psalms. But it reflected upon this, and I thought I would share it with you. I haven't looked at this for about, I guess it was 12 years ago I found this. But it was called Spiritual Olympics, an Aussie psalm. And it reads this way: when the race is long and we are buffeted by a strong wind, when even the young grow weary and the strong become faint, let us keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, who leads the way and completes our faith. When life becomes a steeplechase and obstacles loom large and hazardous, when we fail at a hurdle, feeling foolish and ashamed, I can remember that. Every cross country I got talked into doing. Wow, foolish and ashamed. Let us keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, who was in every way tested as we are. When we must row through choppy waters on our side of the course, while others get the smooth waters and the race seems unfair. Anybody ever had that feeling? It's just the three of us? Yeah. Amen to that one. It just isn't fair. Let us keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, who gave everything. I did not count the cost. When the weight of our responsibilities grows heavier and we carry nagging injuries and face stiff opposition and overzealous judges, let us keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, who chooses the weak to confound the strong. When we are called to take yet another leap of faith, but the bar seems too high and our energy too depleted for this challenge, let us keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, who is with us always, right to the end of time. When we sincerely aim at the target, but our judgment is poor and our arm unsteady, and we fall short or wide of our best intentions, let us keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, who comes not to condemn, but to save. When we suspect others are cheating, yet they win the applause, while we struggle in the middle of the pack, making our integrity seem like a handicap, let us keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, who did not open his mouth to complain. And when we become overwhelmed with tiredness and pain, and the temptation to drop out threatens to consume us again, let us keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, who endured the cross, making light of its disgrace. Surrounded as we are by such a great crowd of witnesses, let us put aside every needless burden, every sin that handicaps us, every sin that mocks us. And loving God, help us to run with determination the race that lies before us, with our eyes fixed on Jesus, With his help, we can do all things to your praise and glory. Amen.